This is Kurt from Classic ATS. Today we're looking at what it takes to put a car that's been sitting in storage for some length of time back into service. So if your car has been sitting, or you've just purchased a car that's been sitting, quite possibly and most likely there's going to be a lot of stuff on that car that really doesn't look right. And if you try to just put it straight back into service, there's some issues there that you may run into. The car may start, may run, but once you start driving it, things are going to start to change, break, or possibly fail. So the first step is inspection. And there's certain areas that I usually go straight to, tires being one of those, because a tire can have good tread and look good, but you don't want to use a tire that's older than 5 years old, even if it looks in really good shape. Now, there are a couple of exceptions that are very rare. For example, a brand new tire that's been sitting on a shelf that's never seen daylight. That's something where you may go, well, maybe I'll use that for a little bit. But even if it's stored inside and covered, that rubber is aging. And so it is not going to work as well as a brand new tire. So really quick, just in case you don't know, this information is pretty public. What we're looking for is the DOT number. These are production numbers that we don't care about, but at the very end of the number, you're going to have a 4-digit number. And this stands for week 31, 2010. So depending on what year you're watching this, right now it's 2021, this is a 11-year-old tire. The next thing I do is on the rack. I've got the car, this one, we've got it sitting here. I've got the tires off so I can see in and look at the brakes, and we're just going to go over a couple of the things under the car first, what I'm looking for. And when I'm doing my inspections in here, I'm looking for a number of things. And some things that may look bad, like this rotor that's really rusty, is not such a big deal. So whenever a car sits and this car's been stored outside, you're going to get rust, even if it's stored inside. This isn't a big deal. We do have a lip on the rotor here, but our pads, if I can move that wheel, still have about half their thickness left. So just because the rotor is rusty doesn't mean that it needs to be changed. Some other things that I'm looking at is items like our struts. Now on this one, this is our boot here, and our bump stop, which is this piece up in here, has also broken and degraded and has fallen out. So this is kind of giving me an indication that, hey, the strut's broken down. The other thing I'm doing is I'm looking at mileage. So this car has 100,000 miles on it. Set of struts are good for about 75,000 to 100,000 miles. This one's not showing any real signs of leakage yet, but some of the other ones, which we'll look at in a minute, you can see where there's oil on the strut and it's been leaking. So this is something that I want to take care of before I put the car back into service. One of the other things that you want to do is grab a hold of your steering, and you want to feel for any excessive play. Now, normally I'll do this with the wheel on. I'll grab the wheel, I'll rock it this direction for wheel bearing, and I'll also rock it side to side. That's looking for wear in the steering joints. One of the other issues with age can be boots and their conditions here. So if the boot is still intact and there's no movement in the joint, then you can leave it. This boot's getting to the point where it's got some cracks, but it hasn't completely broken through. So with this, I've got no movement. I would leave it and just put the car back into service afterwards. Keep an eye on it every time we do an oil change. When this boot splits, it's time to change it. One of the other items, depending on how old your car is, whether it's air-cooled or water-cooled, is cooling components. Now hoses, this being a Boxster, is a water-cooled car. What you want to do with the hoses is you want to grab them and squeeze them. If the hose is rock hard and you hear any kind of crackling or crunching noise, then it's time to change. If you can move them and they're still fairly soft and they move without any noise, then you can pretty much say that they're going to be in reasonable shape. Now in this car, it's already got different hose clamps on it from the factory, so I'm assuming that the hoses have been changed. It is a 20-year-old car, so it's quite possible that hoses have been changed in its service history, but it's just something that you want to keep an eye on, look over, look for things that are looking different or changed. So here's an example of stuff where we would change it. So our brake rotor is rusty just like it is on the front. It's got the same amount of wear. I've got a decent lip up here. Big difference is on this one, if we look in, brake pads are worn out. So it makes sense to go ahead, change the rotor, change the pads, so we've got good fresh brakes and not just put it into service. The next item is on our strut. So this is our rear strut, and what we are seeing here is the whole strut is covered in oil. And this is because the seal up in top has failed. We can see it's quite wet when I move it around. The bump stop is in better condition than the front, but it is still breaking down. So we're going to go ahead on this car and put in front and rear struts. We're going to do rear brake rotors, rear pads, but we're going to leave the front alone. When I'm underneath the car, most of the somewhat modern cars are going to have ground effects. These are plastic shields. When I'm looking at these, I'm looking at a couple of different things. Firstly, I'm just going to have a quick kind of look over, see how secure they are, if anything's broken or falling off the car. But before I really go any further, I'm actually going to have to get these off to be able to see in. On the water-cooled cars running down our tunnel right here, we have hoses that we need to look at. The fuel filter on a Boxster is going to be up in here, so I need to have all of these panels off. With the cover off, we can see our pipes, fuel filter up in, buried up on top right here. So to access that, we would pull these down, move the pipes down. What I'm looking for is things like coolant pipe corrosion around here, general hose condition, same things we did up front. You want to grab your lines, kind of squeeze them, move them. One thing you want to be aware of, if a car's been sitting outside, there's a lot of little cavities that critters like to live in. I found everything from black widows to, at one point I had a large rat inside a car that freaked out one of my employees because its tail dragged down over his nose when he was walking around under the car. So be careful the first time. If it's been sitting outside, you can have a lot of hitchhikers that have moved in. But this is kind of stuff that you want to look at. Any of these little hoses that could cause a failure as soon as you put it back into service. So when it comes to looking at engine and transmission, now part of our putting it back into service is we're going to change all the fluids. So that's engine oil, brake fluid, antifreeze, transmission oil. But there's going to be a lot of things that we don't really know about. So this car has, you can see here on the oil filter, it's got quite a bit of oil. If we look on the ground, it's been on the rack for a couple of days now. We got a couple of drips coming right below the oil filter, but not a horrible amount. Usually what I suggest when it comes to oil leaks is change the oil, wash down the components that look like they're leaking, put the car back into service and see what actually leaks. Because otherwise you can end up just snowballing into having the entire motor torn down chasing a leak the first time, when really you don't know how bad they are to begin with. If it's only a minor leak, no big deal. It can be got with a service schedule at some point, like the valve covers on this car are showing signs of leakage, but that leakage could have occurred over a 5 or 6 year period. You just don't really know at this stage. So one of the other things I'm looking for, just like on the front, is split boots. And this is something we do want to take care of. Now, axle boots can be replaced if need be. What you want to do is grab the axle and rotate it and see if there's any play. If that boot's been split for any length of time and that joint is worn, then there's no point replacing the boot on a worn axle. You're just better off to replace the axle. However, it's not life-threatening. If the axle is worn out but still rotates smoothly and you just want to get the car up and running and driving for a little while, you can leave something like this. It's not going to get any worse. But if the axle is in good shape, has no rotational play, you want to change that boot as soon as possible. These are about a $600 or $700 a piece item, so don't want to kill something that's still in reasonable shape. Some other things that we want to consider on a stored car is most times the battery, if it's been for any length of time, is going to be junk. So our battery on this car, the owner went ahead and put a new battery in it before they delivered the car to us. But usually you want to get that out straight away. The other thing I'm looking for is corrosion on the clamps, any kind of damage. These aren't too bad for corrosion. The bolt's all bent up, so it's time for a new through bolt to go through. Things like that that are going to impair the electrical ability. Now the other thing you'll notice is there's a lot of kind of dirt and debris. This car was stored outside for a number of years, so we've got our hood strut here as well. That's to hold up the hood struts, but we want to clean this entire area. The hood seal area here is in pretty good shape. It should be fine. We'll just clean it and lube it with some silicone grease, and that should put it back into good operating condition. So when it comes to gasoline, the state of the gasoline can be a real issue, and depending on how much of it is in the tank is going to dictate what you need to do with it. Gas, if it hasn't been treated and it's left to sit, will break down, and it'll start to break down in literally a couple of months. So if the car's been sitting for any length of time like this one, there's a good chance you're going to have to drain the fuel tank if it's got a lot of gas in it. If it doesn't have a huge amount of gas in it, I have on some cars, if it doesn't smell super awful, I've added on top of it and kind of flushed it through without any problems. But if it's been in storage for a long period of time and it's got a steel gas tank like the earlier 911s and 912s, you pretty much want to go ahead and drain that out. These cars run plastic tanks, so I don't have to worry so much about corrosion in the tank. It's more concern about the quality of the fuel, how well the car is going to run when we put it back into service and start using it again. So one of the things that we are doing is inspecting all of our rubber components and plastic components. Wiper blades are pretty much a guarantee. This one is just literally coming apart in my hands. Wiper blades don't survive at the best of times, so they're straight in the trash. The other things that I'm looking at on this car has got a plastic piece here. This is actually broken off. There's a mount bolt down in there, and what happens is the sun just gets to the plastic, it becomes brittle, and it gets broken. Now, it could have been broken when the car was parked. This isn't life-threatening. Whole thing's not going to fly off while we're driving, so I'm going to leave that until after my road test just to keep some of the cost down, but I'll recommend to the owner that they replace it on a service item. When it comes to our engine side of things, I want to get all of my covers off so I can see what's going on. I've got the belt exposed on this car. On the later cars where they run a serpentine belt, I want to feel all of the pulleys, make sure they rotate smoothly. I'm also looking at belt condition. Now, you can see this belt is all cracked, so it needs to be replaced. There's a good chance it was cracked before it went into long-term storage. But because it's been sitting around, we are in a forest type area. I'm also looking for damage caused by rodents, where they like to chew on rubber components, they like to chew on the wiring, fuel lines, and belts. So I'm looking for that kind of damage. I want to also grab all of my pulleys and rotate them. Make sure they all turn freely, and then just like a wheel bearing, I'm going to rock them from side to side, see if I have any kind of play going on. I want to make sure that my power steering pump, my alternator, my air conditioning pulley all rotate. They don't feel gritty or stiff to rotate. So on this particular car, we've got our water pump down here. And there is definitely something going on with our water pump. It's very hard to turn, and it feels like if I back the pulley backwards and forwards that I've got something inside is coming loose. So I'm looking for all these kinds of things that are going to tell me, hey, I've got an issue in this area, and I need to go deeper in and look at why it doesn't feel right. The same goes for the top end of the engine compartment. I need access up here to get to my things like my air filter, but I'm also looking, I've got connection boots right here. We'll actually put a screwdriver on these, make sure these hose clamps are tight. I'm looking for obvious signs of cracking or splitting on these boots that would cause an air intake leak. Now, when the car goes back into service, you may still have other issues going on in here just because Everything has been sitting right now. It hasn't really been heated up to operating temperature. It hasn't really been vibrating or moving. When we start driving the car, things are going to change. So typically, once I put a car back into service, I want to see it again after about 2,500 to 3,000 miles, do a first oil change, and really look over and see, hey, let's see if everything is held up and looks the same as it does when we first put the car back onto the road. Some of the other things that I'm looking for are plastic pieces that are broken and not operational. So this is our driver's side mirror switch. And the little plastic legs that lock into these pins right here have broken over time. And it may have been that this was broken before the car went into storage. But I want to fix little things. This is inexpensive. I want to fix that now, just so when they're driving the car, it's not falling on them. I want to make sure my interior controls operate. Nothing's falling off that's going to impair how they drive. Don't need to get too carried away. You're not doing a restoration at most of the times. And like I've been saying, once you start driving the car, things are going to come to light that maybe you can't see right away. So you just want to kind of have a good general look over everything. Lubricate things like seat slides, door locks, door hinges, all of that stuff that is moving components, and it'll make the car that much better when you're putting it back in. If there's a little bit of grease, clean the dirt off, lubricate our roof seals right here, lubricate our door seals. We've got a little piece of underlayment here that's come loose on glue, so we'll probably just trim that away. Just little things like that to get the car presentable and usable again. Here's one of the other things that we want to kind of clean out from storage. This is where we got a pile of debris, and if that's left there, what it's going to result in is corrosion issues, because this will soak up when it rains. You'll get water in there and it's going to cause an issue. We also want to look at other items that are about to fail. So right here we see our hood release solenoid. The cable is down to one strand left. That's something that we also need to take care of, because that's going to break pretty quickly. And then just general areas like on these cars, on the water-cooled cars, we want to make sure that our seals are in good shape. Coolant bottle isn't cracked or leaking. They've exposed the wiring in here. Somebody was doing something in here. So I'll have a general look over, see if I can figure out what they were doing. If not, I'll put all those parts back together. Now that I've finished looking over the car, I've got my list of items that I need to order. So I've got my parts for parts list. On the engine and transmission, I'm just going to treat this like a major service. So I'm going to be ordering engine oil, transmission oil, brake fluid, antifreeze, and then from a service standpoint, spark plugs, air filter, oil filter, fuel filter, cabin filters, so all the filters get changed. A belt in the front. We're going to go ahead and remove the water pump and inspect what's going on with that. I did quote for a new water pump, but I want to confirm it before ordering. I want to get the old one out, see why it feels bad. Now, I did have a list from the owner of items that they knew it needed, and one of those things on the list was they were experiencing a problem with the cooling fans and causing the car to overheat, which was one of the reasons why the car was parked in the first place. Now, I don't want to just start the engine and run it not knowing anything about it to look at why the cooling fans were operating or not operating correctly. But it's quite possible that the water pump was not pumping and circulating the fluid well enough, and I can resolve that problem with a problem I can already see or feel on the car. So I want to fix everything that I can see first, then start the car and see what other issues come up.